Episode number 9.
The Nevada desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a moonscape of scorched earth and jagged mountains that seemed to mock human ambition. The Declassified Marine Sniper Training Facility sat like a fortress in this wasteland, its existence known only to a select few within the core most elite circles. Here, legends were born and careers died in the space between heartbeats. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez stepped off the dust-covered transport truck, her boots hitting the hardpan with a solid thud that seemed to echo across the silent compound. The heat hit her like a physical blow. 120 degrees of merciless desert fury that could cook a man's brain if he wasn't careful. Around her, 19 other Marines emerged from the vehicle, each one hand-picked from units across the globe for this moment. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were the cream of the crop, snipers who had proven themselves in the crucible of combat from Afghanistan to Syria. But Elena was different, and everyone knew it the moment she appeared. In a sea of testosterone-fueled warriors, she stood out like a rose among thorns, not because she was delicate, but because she was the only woman in a program that had never seen female participate. The silence that greeted her arrival was deafening, broken only by the whisper of wind across the desert and the distant crack of gunfire from the training ranges. Gunnery Sergeant Mike Torres watched her from across the compound, his weathered face creased into a skeptical frown. At 42, Torres was a living legend in sniper circles. 47 confirmed kills across 3 deployments, a silver star, and a reputation that preceded him into every room he entered. His arms were covered in tattoos that told the story of his service, coordinates of successful shots, dates of fallen comrades, and the grim Reaper himself perched on his right shoulder. To Torres, the sniper community was sacred ground, and he didn't appreciate what he saw as political correctness invading his domain. "Well," Torres muttered to Staff Sergeant Jake Morrison, a lean Texan with ice blue eyes. "Looks like the Corps is running a social experiment." Morrison chuckled, but his eyes never left Elena as she shouldered her gear with practiced efficiency. "Think she'll make it past the first day? Hell, I'll be surprised if she makes it past the equipment check," Torres replied, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. "This ain't some feel-good movie, Morrison. This is where warriors are made." The compound itself was a testament to military precision and lethality. Low-slung buildings constructed from reinforced concrete house classrooms, armories, and barracks. Beyond them stretched the ranges, a series of increasingly challenging shooting courses that culminated in targets placed at distances that pushed the very limits of human capability and modern weaponry. The facility had been designed by snipers, for snipers, with no concessions made to comfort or convenience. Elena surveyed her surroundings with the calm assessment of a professional. She'd known this moment would come eventually, the moment when she'd have to prove herself not just as a Marine, but as a woman in a world that had never welcomed her kind. The stares didn't bother her. She'd been dealing with them since the day she'd walked into the recruiter's office 6 years ago. What mattered now was performance, and performance was something she understood better than most. The group was called to formation by Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a compact man whose voice could cut through steel. "Welcome to hell, Marines," he began, his words carrying across the desert like a death sentence. "For the next 2 weeks, you will be pushed beyond your limits. You will discover muscles you didn't know you had, and you will learn to hate the very air you breathe. Some of you will break, some of you will quit. We need to know that when you squeeze that trigger, the target goes down." Elena felt her pulse quicken, but not from nervousness. This was what she lived for, the moment when all the training, all the preparation, all the years of dedication would be distilled into a series of trigger pulls that would define her future. Around her, she could sense the other Marines shifting in their seats, the weight of expectations settling on their shoulders like lead blankets. Torres raised his hand, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never met a challenge he couldn't overcome. "Sir, what's the record for this course?" Colonel Mitchell smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "The current record is held by a Marine who shall remain nameless. 4 out of 5 targets with the 2,000-yard shot proving." Elusive. "In the 3 years we've been running this selection, no one has achieved a perfect score. The challenge was laid out like a gauntlet thrown at their feet. Elena could feel the competitive fire burning in the room. 20 elite warriors suddenly transformed into gladiators preparing for combat. This wasn't just about making shots anymore. This was about proving who among them deserved to be called the best. "The course begins in 30 minutes, Rodriguez announced. "Use that time to prepare your equipment, study the range conditions, and make peace with whatever gods you pray to. The order of shooting will be determined by random draw." As the Marines filed out of the briefing room, Elena found herself walking beside Staff Sergeant Morrison, the Texan who had been standing with Torres earlier. Unlike his companion, Morrison seemed genuinely curious rather than hostile. "You ever shot at 2,000 yards before?" he asked, his drawl making the question sound almost casual. "Once or twice," Elena replied, not wanting to reveal too much about her background. Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "It's a different world out there. Wind becomes your enemy, gravity starts playing tricks on you, and the target looks like a postage stamp through the scope. Hell, at that distance, you're practically shooting at tomorrow." They emerged into the blazing desert sun, where the shooting range stretched out before them like a vision from a sniper's fever dream. The targets were barely visible even through binoculars, steel silhouettes that seemed to shimmer and dance in the heat waves rising from the desert floor. Between the firing line and the targets lay a wasteland of scrub brush, rocky outcroppings, and wind patterns that changed with the whims of the desert. Elena set up her equipment with methodical precision, each movement economical and purposeful. She deployed the Barrett's bipod, adjusted the scope for the harsh lighting conditions, and began the ritual of range estimation and wind reading that separated professional snipers from weekend warriors. The rifle felt like an extension of her body, familiar and comfortable despite its intimidating size. Torres had claimed a position 2 spots down from her, his own rifle, a customized Remington M40, gleaming with the care of someone who treated his weapon like a religious artifact. He was holding court with a small group of Marines, his voice carrying clearly across the firing line. "The key to long-range shooting," he was saying, "is understanding that you're not just fighting the target, you're fighting physics itself. Gravity wants to pull your bullet down, wind wants to push it sideways, and the rotation of the earth, yeah, you heard me right, actually affects bullet trajectory at extreme distances." Elena listened with half an ear while continuing her preparation. Torres wasn't wrong about the physics, but his explanation was textbook theory. Real long-range shooting was more art than science, a delicate dance between calculation and instinct that couldn't be taught from a manual. The random draw for shooting order was conducted with military efficiency. Names were pulled from a helmet, and Elena watched as the order was announced. Torres would shoot 3rd, Morrison 7th, and Elena, her heart skipped a beat, would shoot last, 20th out of 20. The pressure position where she would either cap off a day of failures with her own disappointment, or stand alone as the only Marine to conquer the unconquerable. "Well, well," Torres called out when the order was announced. "Looks like our lady friend gets to clean up after the real Marines show her how it's done." The comment drew laughter from some quarters, but Elena noticed that several Marines remained silent. Word of her confident equipment selection had spread, and Spart money was beginning to hedge its bets. The first Marine to shoot was Corporal Williams, a young sniper from Camp Pendleton whose reputation for precision had earned him a spot in the selection. He approached the firing line with visible nervousness, his movements slightly rushed as he settled behind his rifle. The 800-yard shot was clean, a solid hit that drew approving nods from the observers. The 1,200-yard shot was equally impressive, punching through the target's center with authority. But at 1,500 yards, the desert began to exact its toll. Williams's shot went wide, kicking up dust 2 feet to the right of the target. His elimination was swift and final, his dreams of joining the elite unit evaporating like morning dew in the desert heat. The second Marine, Staff Sergeant Lopez, managed to reach the 1,800-yard target before falling victim to a wind shift that sent his bullet sailing high. His curse echoed across the range as he realized his mistake, but the damage was done. Then came Torres's turn, and the entire range fell silent with anticipation. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the chance to see the legend in action, to witness the skills that had made him famous throughout the Corps. Torres approached the firing line like a gunfighter approaching a duel, his movements fluid and confident. He settled behind his rifle with practiced ease, his body language radiating the calm assurance of someone who had never met a shot he couldn't make. The 800-yard target fell with surgical precision, the bullet striking dead center with a metallic clang that rang across the desert. The crowd murmured its approval, but Torres was already adjusting for the next shot, his focus absolute. 1,200 yards, another perfect hit that drew spontaneous applause from the watching Marines. Torres was in his element now, performing for an audience that hung on his every movement. 1,500 yards. The bullet found its mark with devastating accuracy, proving that Torres's reputation was built on solid foundation. The man was a master of his craft, and everyone present knew they were witnessing something special. 1,800 yards, still perfect, still deadly accurate. Torres was making the impossible look routine, his shots so precise they seemed to mock the very concept of difficulty. But then came 2,000 yards, and the desert revealed its true nature. The desert held its breath as Torres prepared for the shot that had broken every Marine who had attempted it. 2,000 yards, a distance where bullets traveled for over 3 seconds, where the curvature of the earth itself became a factor, where the slightest miscalculation could send a round sailing into oblivion. The target, barely visible even through high-powered optics, seemed to mock him from across the wasteland. Torres took his time, more time than he had for any previous shot. Through his scope, the target wavered like a mirage, dancing in the superheated air that rose from the desert floor in shimmering waves. He could feel the eyes of 19 other Marines boring into his back, could sense their collective held breath as they waited to see if the legend could live up to his reputation. The wind had been his ally at shorter distances, but now it became a treacherous enemy. At 2,000 yards, even a 5-mile-per-hour crosswind could push a bullet several feet off target. Torres watched the sparse vegetation between him and the target, reading the subtle signs that spoke of air currents and thermal updrafts. A piece of tumbleweed drifted lazily to the right, then suddenly shifted left as it encountered a wind shear. "Come on, Torres," he muttered to himself, his voice barely audible over the whisper of desert wind. "You've made harder shots than this." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. This was the edge of human capability, the place where skill met physics and sometimes physics won. His finger found the trigger, applied the steady pressure that had become second nature over 15 years of professional shooting. The rifle bucked against his shoulder with familiar authority. 308 rounds screaming across the desert at 2,800 feet per second. For 3 eternal seconds, Torres tracked the bullet's invisible path through his scope, watching for the telltale puff of dust that would mark impact. The dust cloud erupted 3 feet to the left of the target, a small explosion of failure that seemed to echo across the entire range. Torres's jaw clenched as he realized what had happened. He'd failed to account for a thermal updraft that had pushed his bullet just enough to miss. 3 feet at 2,000 yards might as well have been 3 miles. "Damn," he whispered, the word carrying more weight than any curse. Around him, the other Marines shifted uncomfortably, suddenly aware that if Torres, the best among them, couldn't make the shot, what hope did they have? The elimination was swift and professional. Torres gathered his equipment with the stoic dignity of a warrior who had given his best and come up short. As he passed Elena on his way off the firing line, he paused just long enough to mutter, "Good luck, sweetheart. You're gonna need it." The next 7 Marines fell in rapid succession, each eliminated at different distances as the desert claimed its victims. Staff Sergeant Morrison made it to 1,800 yards before a sudden gust of wind sent his bullet wide. Corporal Jackson's rifle malfunctioned at 1,500 yards, the bolt jamming at the worst possible moment. One by one, the elite of the elite discovered that elite wasn't enough. By the time Elena's turn arrived, the mood on the range had shifted from confident anticipation to grim resignation. 17 Marines had tried and failed. Their dreams of joining Operation long shot scattered like dust in the desert wind. The 2,000-yard target remained unconquered, a steel monument to the limits of human capability. Elena approached the firing line with the same measured pace she'd maintained all day, her movements betraying none of the pressure that must have been building inside her. She was the last hope, the final chance for anyone to prove that the impossible was merely improbable. Every eye on the range was focused on her as she began setting up her equipment. The Barrett Meaty 2A1 seemed to dwarf her as she deployed its bipod and settled into position behind the massive rifle. At 30 pounds, the weapon was heavier than most Marines could handle effectively, but Elena manipulated it with the fluid grace of someone who had been born to the task. Her movements were economical, purposeful, each adjustment made with the precision of a master craftsman preparing her tools. She began with the 800-yard target, but unlike the Marines who had gone before her, she didn't rush. Instead, she spent long minutes studying the conditions, reading the wind patterns with an intensity that bordered on meditation. Through her scope, she watched dust devils dance across the desert floor, observed the way heat waves distorted the air, cataloged every variable that could affect her shot. The other Marines watched in fascination as Elena's breathing became mechanical, controlled. Her body seemed to settle into the rifle like she was becoming one with the weapon, her heartbeat slowing to match some internal rhythm that only she could hear. This wasn't just preparation. This was transformation, the metamorphosis of a human being into something more primal and deadly. When she finally squeezed the trigger, the Barrett's thunderous roar seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. The 50 caliber rounds screamed downrange with devastating authority, and through the spotting scope, observers watched it punch through the exact center of the 800-yard target with surgical precision. "Phew, Jesus," Morrison whispered from the observation area. "Did you see how still she was? Like a damn statue." But Elena was already adjusting for the next shot, her focus absolute. The 1,200-yard target presented new challenges: increased wind drift, more pronounced bullet drop, the growing influence of atmospheric conditions. She spent even more time reading the environment, her eyes tracking the movement of every blade of grass, every particle of dust that might reveal the secrets of the wind. The second shot was even more impressive than the first. The bullet found its mark with devastating accuracy, the metallic clang of impact carrying clearly across the desert. Elena's expression never changed, her concentration unbroken by the murmurs of amazement from the watching Marine. Torres found himself leaning forward despite his earlier dismissal, his professional eye recognizing something extraordinary in Elena's technique. She wasn't just shooting, she was conducting a symphony of physics and precision that few humans could even comprehend, much less execute. The 1,500-yard shot required another long period of observation and calculation. Elena's eyes moved constantly, reading signs invisible to lesser shooters. She watched the way shadows fell across the target, noted the subtle shift in wind direction indicated by a piece of debris tumbling across the range. Her breathing became even more controlled, each inhalation and exhalation timed to match the rhythm of her heartbeat. When the shot came, it was perfect. The bullet struck dead center with an authority that seemed to defy the laws of physics. 3 for 3, with each shot more impressive than the last. The watching Marines had fallen completely silent now, aware that they were witnessing something unprecedented. "She's not human," Corporal Williams muttered, his voice filled with awe. "No one shoots like that." Elena was already preparing for the 1,800-yard shot, but her preparation had taken on an almost ritualistic quality. She seemed to be communing with forces beyond human understanding, reading the desert like an ancient oracle reading entrails. Her stillness was absolute, her focus so intense it seemed to bend reality around her. The fourth shot rang out with the same thunderous authority as the others, and once again the bullet found its mark with devastating precision. 4 perfect shots at distances that had broken seasoned professionals. Elena had accomplished what no Marine in the program's history had managed. She had conquered the unconquerable. But now came the monster. 2,000 yards where physics and skill collided in a dance that had claimed every warrior who had dared attempt it. The target was barely visible even through the Barrett's powerful scope, a steel silhouette that seemed to mock human ambition from across the wasteland. Elena's preparation for this final shot was unlike anything the observers had witnessed. She spent nearly 10 minutes in absolute stillness, her body so motionless she might have been carved from stone. Her breathing became so controlled it was barely perceptible, each breath timed to match some internal metronome that only she could hear. Through her scope, she could see the target wavering in the heat haze, dancing like a phantom in the superheated air. But Elena had learned to see beyond the illusion, to read the true position of her target through the distortion. Her calculations were complex beyond imagination: wind speed and direction at multiple altitudes, the effect of temperature on bullet velocity, even the Coriolis effect caused by the Earth's rotation. The desert wind whispered secrets across the range as Elena made her final adjustments. Her finger found the trigger with the delicate touch of a surgeon, applying pressure so gradually it seemed like the rifle might fire itself. Around her, 20 Marines held their collective breath, aware that they were about to witness either the greatest shot in Marine Corps history or the final proof that some barriers were meant to remain unbroken. The moment stretched like eternity, balanced on the edge of a trigger pull that would define not just Elena's future, but the future of precision warfare itself. Time seemed to crystallize around Elena as she lay behind the Barrett, her world reduced to the narrow tunnel of her scope and the rhythmic thunder of her heartbeat. The 2,000-yard target wavered in the heat haze like a mirage, a steel phantom that had claimed the dreams of every Marine who had dared challenge it. But Elena saw beyond the illusion, her mind processing variables that would have overwhelmed a supercomputer. The wind was the key. It always was at extreme distances. Through her scope, she watched a piece of tumbleweed drift across the range at the 1,000-yard mark, noting how it suddenly shifted direction as it encountered a thermal updraft. The desert was a living thing, breathing with currents of superheated air that rose and fell in patterns only the most experienced shooters could read. Elena's breathing had become so controlled it was barely perceptible, each inhalation and exhalation timed to match the rhythm of her pulse. She had learned this technique from her father, a former Army Ranger who had taught her that the human body was just another variable to be controlled and mastered. Her heartbeat, normally around 60 beats per minute, had slowed to 45 through sheer force of will. Behind her, 19 Marines watched in absolute silence, their own breathing suspended as they witnessed something that transcended normal human capability. Torres found himself leaning forward despite his earlier skepticism, his professional eye recognizing the signs of a master at work. This wasn't just marksmanship. This was artistry of the highest order. Through the spotting scope, Master Sergeant Rodriguez tracked Elena's every micro-movement, noting the way she seemed to become one with her weapon. In 30 years of military service, he had never seen anything like this level of focus and control. The woman behind the rifle had transformed into something primal and deadly, a predator preparing to strike across an impossible distance. Elena's calculations were staggering in their complexity. The bullet would travel for 3.2 seconds, during which time the Earth would rotate approximately 0.13 degrees, enough to affect point of impact by several inches at this distance. The temperature differential between the firing line and the target area would cause the bullet to rise slightly as it passed through layers of varying air density. Wind speed was 8 miles per hour from the southwest at ground level, but thermal imaging suggested it shifted to 12 miles per hour from the west at the bullet's peak trajectory. Her finger rested on the trigger with the delicate touch of a surgeon, applying pressure so gradually that the rifle's firing mechanism seemed to be holding its breath along with everyone else. The Barrett's massive bulk had become an extension of her body, 30 pounds of precision engineering that responded to her slightest thought. Colonel Mitchell watched from the observation tower, her own pulse quickening as she realized what she was witnessing. In her 25 years of military service, she had seen the best shooters the Corps had to offer, but this was something different. This was the emergence of a new standard, a redefinition of what was possible with a rifle and human skill. Elena made her final adjustment, a quarter click left on the windage knob, compensating for the crosswind that would affect the bullet's path during its long journey downrange. The movement was so subtle that most observers missed it entirely, but Torres caught it and nodded with grudging respect. The woman knew what she was doing. The moment of truth arrived like the calm before a storm. Elena's world contracted to a single point of focus, her consciousness merging with the crosshairs centered on a target that existed at the very edge of human capability. Her breathing stopped entirely. her body becoming a platform of absolute stillness that would have impressed a statue. The trigger broke with the crisp authority of precision engineering, and the Barrett erupted with a sound like thunder splitting the heavens. The massive rifle bucked against Elena's shoulder with enough force to knock most shooters off target, but she absorbed the recoil with practiced ease, her body flowing with the weapon's movement like a dancer following her partner's lead. The .50 caliber bullet screamed across the desert at 2,900 feet per second, its passage marked by a sonic crack that echoed off the distant mountains. For 3.2 eternal seconds, every eye on the range tracked the invisible projectile's arc through the shimmering air, watching for the telltale puff of dust that would mark impact. Torres found himself holding his breath despite his earlier confidence that the shot was impossible. Through his binoculars, he watched the target area with the intensity of a man whose worldview was about to be shattered. The seconds stretched like hours, each heartbeat an eternity of anticipation. Morrison gripped his spotting scope so tightly his knuckles turned white, his Texas drawl reduced to a whispered prayer. "Come on, come on, come on." Master Sergeant Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio from the observation tower, his words carrying the weight of military authority. "Spotters report impact." The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the whisper of desert wind and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Every Marine on the range strained their eyes toward the target, searching for confirmation of what their hearts hoped but their minds couldn't quite believe. Then Staff Sergeant Chen's voice cut through the tension like a blade, his words carrying clearly across the range. "Target hit. Dead center. Perfect shot." The silence exploded into chaos. Marines who had been holding their breath for what felt like hours suddenly erupted in cheers, their voices echoing across the desert like a battle cry. Some threw their hats in the air, others simply stood in stunned disbelief, unable to process what they had just witnessed. Torres lowered his binoculars with shaking hands, his face a mask of amazement and grudging respect. Through the powerful optics, he had seen the impossible, a perfect hit at a distance that defied human capability. The bullet had struck the exact center of the target with surgical precision, punching through the steel silhouette like it was made of paper. "Holy shit," Morrison whispered, his voice filled with awe. "She actually did it. She made the impossible shot." Elena remained motionless behind her rifle for several more seconds, her breathing slowly returning to normal as she processed what had just happened. She had known the shot was good the moment the trigger broke, had felt the perfect release, the flawless follow. Through that marked a shot destined for greatness. But even she seemed slightly stunned by the magnitude of her achievement. Colonel Mitchell's voice boomed across the range from the observation tower, her words carrying the authority of someone who had just witnessed history in the making. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have just witnessed the first perfect score in the history of the Reaper's Challenge. Staff Sergeant Vasquez has accomplished what no Marine before her has managed: 5 perfect shots at distances ranging from 800 to 2,000 yards. The cheering intensified, but Elena seemed oblivious to the celebration erupting around her. She began breaking down her rifle with the same methodical precision she had shown throughout the day, each movement economical and purposeful. The Barrett was disassembled and secured with the care of someone who understood that her weapon was more than just a tool. It was a partner in the deadly dance of precision warfare. Torres approached slowly, his earlier arrogance replaced by something approaching humility. The man who had mocked her equipment selection just hours earlier now looked at Elena with the respect reserved for a fellow warrior who had proven herself in the crucible of competition. "That was..." he began, then stopped, searching for words adequate to describe what he had witnessed. "That was the most incredible shooting I've ever seen. Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that?" Elena looked up from her equipment, her expression calm despite the magnitude of her achievement. "Practice," she said simply, but there was something in her eyes that suggested depths Torres couldn't fathom. Master Sergeant Rodriguez's voice crackled over the loudspeaker, cutting through the celebration. "All personnel report to the briefing room for debriefing. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, please remain on the range for individual consultation." As the other Marines began filing off the range, their voices filled with excited discussion of what they had witnessed, Elena found herself alone with her thoughts and the echoing memory of the most perfect shot of her life. The desert wind whispered across the range, carrying with it the promise of challenges yet to come and targets yet to be conquered. The 2,000-yard shot had been more than just a demonstration of marksmanship. It had been a declaration of war against the impossible, a statement that the limits of human capability were merely suggestions waiting to be ignored by those with the skill and determination to transcend them. The desert sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains when Elena finally gathered her equipment and walked toward the briefing facility. Behind her, the 2,000-yard target stood like a monument to the impossible made possible, its center punched clean through by a shot that would become legend within hours. The other Marines had dispersed to their quarters, their voices still buzzing with excitement and disbelief over what they had witnessed. Inside the briefing room, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Word of Elena's perfect score had spread through the facility like wildfire, and even Marines who hadn't been present for the shooting were gathering to catch a glimpse of the woman who had redefined the possible. Torres sat in the front row, his earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity and hard-earned respect. Colonel Mitchell stood at the front of the room, her expression unreadable as she waited for Elena to take her seat. Master Sergeant Rodriguez flanked her, his weathered face showing the first signs of what might have been a smile. Major Chen occupied a chair to the side, his laptop open and fingers poised over the keyboard as if preparing to document something significant. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, Colonel Mitchell began, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. What you accomplished today has never been achieved in the 3-year history of this program. 5 perfect shots at distances ranging from 800 to 2,000 yards represents a level of marksmanship that frankly defies explanation. Elena remained standing at attention, her expression calm despite the magnitude of the moment. Thank you, ma'am. At ease, Marine, Mitchell continued. What I'm about to ask you is not an order, but a request. The other Marines in this room, hell, probably half the Corps by now, want to know how you did it. Where did you learn to shoot like that? Elena relaxed slightly, her posture shifting from military formality to something more natural. She glanced around the room, taking in the faces of Marines who had gone from mockery to amazement in the span of a few hours. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. My father was Master Sergeant Carlos Vasquez, Army Special Forces, she began, and several Marines in the room straightened with recognition. The name carried weight in military circles. Carlos Vasquez had been a legend in his own right, a sniper whose exploits in Iraq and Afghanistan had become the stuff of military folklore. He started teaching me to shoot when I was 8 years old, Elena continued, her voice taking on a softer quality as she remembered. Not because he wanted me to become a soldier, but because he believed that precision was a life skill. Mija, he used to say, anything worth doing is worth doing perfectly. Torres leaned forward, his interest genuine now. Carlos Vasquez was your father. Jesus, that man was a ghost. 3 tours, over 60 confirmed kills, and he could make shots that made other snipers weep. Elena nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. He was also the most patient teacher you could imagine. Every weekend, we'd drive out to the desert, not unlike this one, and he'd set up targets at increasingly ridiculous distances. By the time I was 12, I was consistently hitting targets at 1,000 yards. The room had fallen completely silent, every Marine hanging on her words. This wasn't just a story about exceptional marksmanship. This was a glimpse into the making of a legend. When I turned 16, Elena continued, my father entered me in the National Long Range Championship. I was the youngest competitor by 5 years and definitely the only girl. The other shooters looked at me the same way you all did this morning, like I was some kind of curiosity who didn't belong. Morrison spoke up from the back of the room, his Texas drawl carrying genuine interest. How'd you do? Elena's smile widened slightly. I won. Set a new record with a 23-47-yard shot that stood unbroken for 3 years. The target was a steel silhouette no bigger than a dinner plate, and I put the bullet dead center on my first attempt. The silence that followed was profound. These were Marines who understood the significance of such a shot, who knew that 23-47 yards represented the absolute pinnacle of human marksmanship capability. The fact that Elena had achieved it as a teenager was almost incomprehensible. Colonel Mitchell found her voice first. "Staff Sergeant, why didn't this information appear in your service record? A civilian marksmanship record of that caliber should have been noted during your recruitment." Elena's expression grew slightly more serious. "Because I asked that it not be included, ma'am. I wanted to earn my place in the Corps based on my performance as a Marine, not on my civilian achievements. I've spent 6 years proving myself one shot at a time, one mission at a time." Torres stood up slowly, his movement drawing every eye in the room. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man confronting his own prejudices. "Staff Sergeant, I owe you an apology. When I saw you reach for that Barrett this morning, I made assumptions based on ignorance. I've been shooting for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what you did out there today." He extended his hand, and Elena shook it firmly. "I was wrong about the gun, and I was wrong about you. That Barrett wasn't the wrong weapon. It was the only weapon capable of what you had planned." Elena accepted the handshake graciously. "No apology necessary, Gunnery Sergeant. You weren't the first person to underestimate me, and you won't be the last. But I appreciate the honesty." Major Chen looked up from his laptop, his quiet voice cutting through the emotional moment. "Staff Sergeant, I have to ask, why the Marines? With your civilian credentials, you could have written your own ticket with any number of military or law enforcement agencies." Elena was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. When she spoke, her voice carried the conviction of someone who had found her calling. "Because the Marines don't just make shots, they make the shots that matter. Every bullet fired by a Marine sniper has the potential to save lives, to end conflicts, to change the course of history. That's the kind of responsibility I wanted." She paused, looking around the room at faces that now showed nothing but respect and admiration. "My father used to say that a sniper's greatest weapon isn't their rifle. It's their judgment, the ability to know when to take the shot and when to hold fire. The Marines taught me that lesson in ways civilian competition never could." Master Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward, his gruff exterior softened by genuine pride. "Staff Sergeant Vasquez, it is my honor to inform you that you have been selected for Operation Long Shot. Your performance today wasn't just exceptional, it was revolutionary. You've proven that the impossible is merely improbable when placed in the hands of someone with your skill and dedication." The room erupted in applause, but Elena remained focused on Rodriguez's words. This was what she had been working toward her entire career, the chance to push the boundaries of what was possible, to take on missions that other snipers considered beyond human capability. "There's one more thing," Colonel Mitchell added, her voice carrying a note of anticipation. "Your 2,000-yard shot today was recorded by our high-speed cameras. The footage will be used for training purposes, but more importantly, it will serve as proof that the limits we thought existed were merely barriers waiting to be broken." Elena nodded, understanding the significance. Her shot would become more than just a personal achievement. It would become a new standard, a benchmark that future Marines would strive to reach. As the briefing concluded and Marines began filing out of the room, Torres lingered behind. When he and Elena were alone, he spoke quietly, his voice carrying genuine curiosity. "That comment you made earlier about me choosing the wrong assumption instead of you choosing the wrong gun, you had that locked and loaded before you ever touched the rifle, didn't you?" Elena smiled, shouldering her gear with practiced ease. "Gunnery Sergeant, I've been dealing with assumptions my entire life. The difference is I've learned to let my shooting do the talking." As she walked toward the door, Torres called after her. "Hey, Vasquez." She turned back, eyebrow raised in question. "Next time someone tells you that you picked the wrong gun," Elena's smile was radiant, "I'll tell them to ask the target at 2,000 yards. The desert wind whispered across the range as Elena stepped into the fading light, her perfect shot already becoming legend. Behind her, the facility buzzed with the energy of witnessing history, but Elena was already thinking ahead to the next impossible shot, the next barrier waiting to be shattered by skill, determination, and the absolute certainty that limits existed only in the minds of those afraid to transcend them. The Barrett 82A1 had indeed been the right gun, not because it was the most powerful, but because it was the only weapon capable of matching the ambitions of the woman who wielded it.